Good evening. My name is Connie Rizzo. Thank you for allowing us to speak at this public hearing. Since I already spoke once before, I just want to reiterate, I share the views of Mike Mueller here, of the insurance agent gentleman, of Ms. Perry. All of those ideas and suggestions are what I would also say are very, very good and valid ideas. I am not in favor of ordinance amending Chapter 32. I don't think that it would be helpful to my business, Rizzo's Resources, at all, because just like the other gentleman said, it's killing the small business owner. And I am also an election judge here in Aurora, and as this precinct committeeman also said, it would stifle political messages that we may need to hear. So I just want to say thank you for your time, and please, Alderman, don't pass this ordinance. Thank you.
Shirley Myers. She left. Oh, I'm sorry. All right. Next then would be James Knightright.
Hi, I'll try to be real brief. I'd like to urge you to move forward with this ordinance. I think we need the teeth this ordinance provides to control the door-to-door peddlers and the hailstorm chasers that come around to our houses. We need to stop organizations from just dropping papers and flyers at vacant properties. Vacant property is not only is it an eyesore to the neighborhood, I lost my spot. Anyway, recently we picked up a realtor sign that had been lying at this entrance to our subdivision for a month. So it's and we picked up different campaign signs and things like that that have been left lying around months after the snow has finally gone away. So it's there's a cost in collecting this surplus garbage, and it falls on the city, and it falls on the cities. The cost is in time, in neighborhood pride and quality of life, and those issues have to be addressed. I read the papers to which I subscribe. However, it's time for us to stop subsidizing those papers with our treasure, our time, and our trash collection. And those costs are not something that's protected by the First Amendment. Two other points that have been made. Someone has talked about the 30-day notice being a problem. And frankly, I've been involved in churches for a number of years, and I don't know of any churches that didn't put in more than 30 days in planning a major outreach like that. In fact, I'd be kind of a little leery of a church that decides next week to do an outreach. Someone's also talked about people posting signs for lost dogs and things like that. And that's a real good, heart-wrenching point. But let's face it, that's already in the ordinance. That's not getting changed by this amendment. So I urge you to move forward with this. And I thank you.
Thank you. And Eric Scheidler.
My name is Eric Scheidler, just down the road. And I already came and spoke to the previous hearing, but there's one point that I'd like to repeat for the benefit of any of aldermen who were not here at that meeting, and for the gathered room of citizens here, my friends and neighbors of Aurora. This is United States Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens, writing for the majority of the United States Supreme Court in the 2002 case Watchtower Society versus the Village of Stratton. And here's what Stevens wrote. It is offensive, not only to the values protected by the First Amendment, but to the very notion of a free society, that in the context of everyday public discourse, a citizen must first inform the government of her desire to speak to her neighbors, and then obtain a permit to do so. That is the voice of our highest court. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not the least bit worried about this ordinance. As a pro-life activist, as a community activist, because I know that within days, if not hours, of its passage, it will be enjoined in federal court.
Amen.
My only concern is that the newspapers and the small business or somebody like that might get there before I do, because I'd really like to be the one who files that lawsuit. Maybe then we'll get to go back before Judge Virginia Kendall, with whom the city has already been involved in a lawsuit with myself and the pro-life group here in the Fox Valley. But I hope it doesn't get to that point. I'm really not here today to talk to you as a pro-life activist, as somebody who does this kind of door-to-door leafleting. I'm here to talk to you as a citizen of Aurora who doesn't want to see his city government embroiled in another lawsuit restricting freedom of speech in our community. As a parent, it's horrifying to me that an effort to deal with a real problem, the problem of newspaper trash, I deal with it at my home. That's a real problem. When the newspaper gets stuck into somebody's snowblower, or when there's a pile of newspapers on a vacant property, or when I get home from vacation and find some advertising circulars have piled up on my steps. That's a real problem. That should be addressed. But to see that real problem addressed with such a bazooka gun of a response, where what we really need is a slingshot, that really bothers me. Let me return to what Stephen said. This is offensive not only to the First Amendment, which is going to solve the problem, as far as I'm concerned. This ordinance is never going to see a light of day. But to the very notion of a free society. People read the newspaper. They hear a report about some new law being passed. Look, I'm very familiar with these kinds of things. People will see something in the newspaper about this, and whether the thing's passed or not, they'll wonder if maybe they're not allowed to pass out flyers about the babysitting service, or about the lost dog, or about the local issue they're concerned about. As, for example, in 2007, when Planned Parenthood came to town, we didn't have 30 days to submit our permit applications. We had to get out on the street the next day and start passing out flyers to our neighbors about this issue. Then it would cross people's minds. They might have to ask the government for permission to engage in this kind of traditional free speech in our country. It should horrify us. That's right. It should horrify us, the thought that we would have to appeal to the government for permission to pass out a flyer in our neighborhoods. The very fact that this ordinance has been proposed, that these particular changes have been proposed to deal with that real problem, is offensive. And I would urge the council to go back to the drawing board. Look at what you can do to deal with that trash problem without this incredibly broad and sweeping and unconstitutional ordinance, which will only cheapen our sense of free speech in Aurora. It will embroil the city in yet another lawsuit over civil rights, and it will not really deal with the problem at hand, because it will be struck down. Let's really solve this problem, not at the expense of our free speech. Newspaper trash is a real concern, but trashing the First Amendment isn't the way to solve it. Thank you.